I like sketchbooks of the chunky variety. I guess you could say that. I like them big. I like them chunky. Chunky, chunky, 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 chunky.
What's up, Fuckwhacks? So, to start off the new year, this video was sponsored by Arrtx, and they gave me a watercolor sketchbook, which I will be drawing in today. I already drew in it, but this video will actually focusing more on like the sketchbook's capability, since it is a watercolor sketchbook, so I'm going to be doing something with watercolors. Anyway, so I figured something that I have really wanted to talk about for a while, but I just couldn't really find a way to verbalize it or really talk about it was sketchbooks themselves, because one thing I've noticed about the art community is that the way sketchbooks have been approached over the years has gotten interesting. I've just noticed the shift in how people perceive sketchbooks and how they use them compared to like a couple of years ago. Like when I used to watch sketchbook tours all the time when I was a kid, and when I watched them, I would get a lot of inspiration, but when I see them nowadays, I've noticed that they're a lot different. And I'm not saying this in a bad way, but I do see some issues that have arisen from this trend of how sketchbooks are being used, and it all stems from the chunky sketchbook phase that's going on right now. Everybody is obsessed with having their sketchbooks be chunky. It's like a whole thing. I've played into it. I think it's just because the visual of seeing a book that's so huge and so thick and full of art is just really appealing, and also it is really satisfying to go through a sketchbook that's really chunky and seeing all the work and time put into it, because it's an art in itself. Actually, I do appreciate that. I have a lot of chunky sketchbooks, and I will say that it does suck in a lot of ways because they're hard to really store and they're delicate. I've noticed that all my chunky sketchbooks have broken in some sort of way, or they need to be kind of tied down, or they're not great. Early on they were fine, but as I continue using them, something broke or something was ripped or whatever. It's chunky sketchbooks are fun conceptually, but when they're done, they're just a mess, and it really sucks, which is one of the gripes that I have with chunky sketchbooks, is that people don't really bring that up too much. They always talk about oh yeah, this chunky sketchbook, it's finished, look how big it is, but they never talk about how there's so much damage going on. Or I mean, sometimes they might show it off by having to put a bunch of rubber bands or something around it, but yeah, that's one of the things that sucks about chunky sketchbooks. They are always going to come out with a lot of scars. What also contributes to the chunky sketchbook is the fact that people try to make their sketchbooks chunky by filling it with stuff that isn't necessarily art, but still art related. This is where things get a little complicated. So I've noticed that the journaling and scrapbook community have sort of fused into the art community in a way. They're all connected, but I feel a few years ago they were a little bit more distant, but nowadays they're so overlapping with each other that they're really similar. And it's going to kind of relate to something that I'm going to mention later, but I've noticed that people try to make their sketchbooks chunky by putting scrapbook materials in them. They put all these different things in there, and I'm not saying this in a bad way. I'm saying people do this because they're trying to make their sketchbooks chunkier, and I feel the issue I have is that people are making them chunky for the sake of it. And I know some are oh, what's the problem with that? But it's I guess that's where the title of the video comes in, where I think some people are focusing way too much on the aesthetics of their sketchbooks and not on just making art and just having fun with it, and focusing more on how to appeal to social media. That's kind of the main issue I have, is that sketchbooks have become more of a way to show off, and have become more a competition whose sketchbook is the most aesthetic, rather than just being a book about practicing and learning your style and experimenting and all this other stuff. Instead, it's how do I make my sketchbook look really pretty so I can post on Instagram and it get tons of likes compared to these other people? And that's where the whole sketchbook envy starts to come in. That's where people start to get art block and start to, when they post their sketchbook tours, they start apologizing and be oh, sorry guys, my sketchbook isn't that pretty compared to other people, that sort of thing. That's where my issue arises, is you guys should not focus too much on aesthetics. And I know that for me, of all people, it's kind of ironic, because when I show off my sketchbooks, they tend to be very over the top and bright and colorful, but there are pages where I'm just I give up, I'm not doing much on this page, whatever, and that's fine. I feel a lot of people feel pressure from social media to make their sketchbooks pretty, every page has to be pretty, and I convinced myself that I was doing it for myself. But no, I was doing it because I wanted to make it appealing to other people, even though I don't even scan too much of my sketchbook pages anymore. I only show them off in tours. But yeah, like I was convincing myself that it was for myself, but it really wasn't. It was for the algorithm. It was for the appease of other people rather than for myself. So that's why sometimes when I look through some other sketchbooks that are older, I feel a bit of nostalgia. I kind of miss that sort of vibe of when it was simpler, when I wasn't focusing so hard on making it pretty. I mean, there were definitely some older sketchbooks where I didn't post the art from, but I still decked out the book because that was just what I was into at the time. So it is partially for myself still, but like ultimately I was kind of doing it with people in mind. Like I was doing it with the intent of like someone is going to see this one day, so I might as well make it look good, which is kind of where things start to stagnate your creativity a little bit, because I feel like when we make art that's kind of meant to just appease people rather than for ourselves, it tends to lose a bit of creativity. It loses a little bit of something because we're focusing so hard on pleasing other people rather than ourselves. And like, yeah, if you're gonna like make content and stuff, like you have to kind of find that balance, but ultimately yourself should be like the priority. It shouldn't be other people. It should be like the ratio should be like, I don't know, 60-40, maybe a little higher, like 70-30, 70% for yourself and 30% for the people. I don't know, but like the point is that like I think a lot of sketchbooks that people post tend to kind of be curated in a way that's meant to look good for the algorithm. Like when I go on Instagram, I see all these sketchbooks, they're all colorful, they all have like the same sort of concepts and stuff going on, the same washi tape, the same types of stickers, the same types of art being drawn too. Like it feels like some people are even afraid of just like experimenting their own books and drawing things that are outside of like what's acceptable and popular nowadays. It's like if you aren't drawing like cutesy Jumi no Core type stuff or whatever, or anything with like tons of washi tape and cutesy Tamagotchi stickers or whatever, then it's like it's not gonna do well. And listen, I mean I know that's popular, but like it sucks that that's kind of what's become the norm nowadays. And to bring the topic of journaling and scrapbooking into this is kind of also an issue that I noticed within the journaling and scrapbooking community. I know that they're kind of similar, but like they're kind of their own things, but they're still overlapping in a way. But yeah, so I've noticed that in those communities a lot of people have felt pressure to make their books aesthetic, even if they're personal. And I've noticed this with myself as well, that I try really hard to make my pages very like pretty looking, but then I'm like, no one's gonna see this. Why am I trying so hard to make this book like aesthetic? Like, I mean, yes, to an extent it is for myself, but like no one's gonna see this spread. Like sometimes, very occasionally, I will post like a journal spread if it's not too personal and I really like how it looks, but most of the time I keep a lot of the stuff to myself. But I've noticed that even if it is for myself, I do get this like weird feeling like someone's watching. Like I have to make it pretty for the other people that might see it rather than for myself. And I don't really like that mindset that I've developed because of social media. I really hate that. I think it really sucks that social media has kind of altered how we perceive sketchbooks and has sort of taken it more into the direction of like using sketchbooks to make them as chunky as possible and filling them with all these aesthetic pretty things and charms and all this other stuff, rather than just focusing on like developing your style and experimenting and just doing other things and making things that are sketchy and weird and not always making everything pretty. Because, you know, your art's not always gonna be pretty. Your art's gonna have to be ugly sometimes to make it pretty, which is the thing that I think a lot of people are afraid of, because that's what sketchbooks are for. I mean, you can use your book for whatever you want at the end of the day. I'm not here to dictate that, but I am saying that like if you want your art to improve, you do have to like experiment and like make ugly art. You have to do a lot of crappy sketches and all that stuff to make it look decent. But yeah, so another thing I wanted to mention is that I do feel like there's another side where people tend to get a little rude towards aesthetic sketchbook people, where like I've noticed on some videos where the sketchbook in question is a lot less aesthetic. There's not much stuff going on. There's no pizzazz. It's just like sketches and are, you know, more developmental type stuff. People will comment like, oh, thank you so much for having a realistic sketchbook, or a sketchbook that's not like the other ones. And it's just, that rubs me the wrong way. Like, why are we bringing down other people for their sketchbooks? Like, I get that like there's oversaturation of sketchbooks being super aesthetic, but like we also should not insult people who have overly aesthetic sketchbooks. I think that there should be balance. We should be able to acknowledge that, yeah, I think a lot of people are focusing way too much on making their sketchbooks pretty, trying way too hard to appeal to the algorithm, but also just because someone has a sketchbook that's not pretty and it's just kind of a book that's just full of sketches and doodles and messy stuff, that does not make their sketchbook inherently better. A sketchbook is a sketchbook. It's whatever. It is a tool at the end of the day, and if some people want to go crazy with them, make their sketchbooks into like this full-blown, super pretty, colorful thing with charms and stickers, washi tape, and all this other stuff, then go ham. Have fun with it, okay? Like, I'm not against that. The point is that I think we focus way too much on the algorithm and trying hard to appease the people, even when we're doing stuff in private, which is why I wanted to make this video. I think that we focus too much on that. And I also wanted to mention that chunky sketchbooks are not as fun as they really appear to be, because they are hard to manage. They break easily, and once they're in that break stage, they can never go back. You can never properly fix them. You have to cover them with a bunch of tape, and they gotta be held together, and it's a mess. It's a mess, and they're hard to contain. Like, one of my books is literally like falling apart. The backside just is gone, fell off. And then the other books, they're hanging on a little bit, but they're not in the best condition. They used to be fine, but now they're not. And that's what really sucks at the end of the day. But, you know, I don't hear people talk about that enough. They always just want to emphasize, like, oh, look how fun and chunky the sketchbook is. They don't want to talk about that side of it because that's not aesthetic, I guess. So, yeah. One final thing I want to mention is that I've noticed that this still affects me to this day. Sometimes I'll be in my book and I'll want to do something, but then I'll go on Pinterest and look for inspiration for like a spread idea or whatever, because I'm still caught in the mindset of like making my sketchbook pretty, because I do sketchbook tours. I don't do them super often anymore because I try to record when I'm home alone, and that can be difficult sometimes, so that's why there aren't as frequent as they used to be. But yeah, like, I still make pages that I feel like try hard to appease the people, and it really sucks that I fall into that trap. And that's how I felt when I got my Hobonichi. I got it, and I was just like, I literally stalled on like doing anything in it because I wanted it to be aesthetic, like all the other Pinterest girlies and stuff. And I realized that this is not a good mindset to have. I should just make it for myself. That's what I got it for, not just for everybody else. But I did want to post stuff from there, but it also was like, I wanted to do this for myself because I wanted to have one. So it just really sucks that I got into that mindset, and I kept like stalling on making art because I was like, I need this page to look a certain way, because if it's not aesthetic, then it's not worth making, and that's not good. I shouldn't think like that, but I keep getting caught up in it sometimes. It happens to the best of us, you know? It really sucks, but it is what it is. So yeah, I hope that this was insightful, I guess. I hope that you approach your sketchbooks differently. Have fun with them, you know? It should be, at the end of the day, a personal book where you develop and grow yourself as an artist. And if you want it to just be a scrapbook, then have it be a scrapbook. If you want it to be a journal, then let it be a journal. If you want to do nothing but chicken scratch doodles, then go ahead and do that. Like, there's no right or wrong way to do a sketchbook, but as long as you're not approaching it with like the idea that there's people watching, I think you're fine. So with that said, I'll see you quacks later.